Okay, so welcome to today's webinar, the Getting to Impact Preparation session. My name is Natasha Pay, Manager of Eastern Cities with Vibrant Communities, Cities Reducing Poverty, and I'm here to introduce our discussion today with Mark Cabaj of Here to There Consulting. And if you go to the next slide, Al, there we go. So Mark Cabaj is the president of the consulting company From Here to There and is a Tamarack Institute associate. Between 1997 and 2000, Mark was the coordinator of the Waterloo Region's Opportunities 2000 project, an initiative that won provincial, national, and international awards for its multi-sector approach to poverty reduction. He served briefly as the executive director of SEDNet and was the executive director of Vibrant Communities Canada from 2002 to 2011. Mark's current focus is on developing practical ways to understand, plan, and evaluate for efforts to address complex issues. You will also see on your screen your VC managers of cities. It's myself, Allison Homer, and Al Richards. We're all here assisting to today's call. Allison is the manager of Western Cities. I myself am the manager of Eastern Cities, and Al is our newest manager of cities, working with the territories, the states, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, parts of Alberta, and Southwestern Ontario cities. So we will be working along with you, the participants of the COP series, on a regular basis to support you to apply the theory that you learn here to the practice back home so that you have an impact report by the end of the year. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. We'll go through a quick round of check-ins in a couple of minutes, but first I want to hand it over to Mark to introduce today's agenda and the purpose of the Getting to Impact series.
Hi, thanks Natasha. Hi everyone. I'm pleased to be here, both because of this topic, which interests me quite a bit. It's interested me ever since 1996, and we had to start evaluating the work in Waterloo with Opportunities 2000. And interesting because I like working with networks like this one who have a bunch of people who are committed to trying to move the needle on a complex issue and are keen to get evaluation feedback as part of that enterprise. We will go into the content of this shortly, but the presentation today after our check-in is we're going to confirm the intent and the product of the series, which includes getting feedback on your impact in a way that allows you to come up with at least a first iteration of a report. That'll be the product. We'll talk about the supports that are involved in helping you produce that. We'll touch on the approach, and I'm going to give you a couple little examples of what how we're defining impacts and what that might look like on the ground in terms of reporting on impact. And then Natasha will go over the timelines for making this thing happen. And we'll try and do that fairly quickly so we have time for Q&A and discussion to surface emerging issues and questions that we may not have thought about, or questions that we have thought about but we couldn't put on the PowerPoint. And then we'll be closing within the hour. So it's going to be a fast and tight agenda, but a good, I think, orientation for us on our multi-month journey that we're about to embark on. Back to you, Natasha.
All right, so if you go to the next slide, Al. Yeah, Mark, did you want to speak to the intent first?
Sure. Sorry, folks, I just had the sequence wrong. So, yeah, the action learning project that we have here, and I do think it's well phrased as an action learning project, is designed to improve your capacity, your ability to track the impact of your local efforts. So you can use that for communicating out to your constituents to help build momentum that can help you inform your own strategy and learning. And it's not on here, but also it can generate data that you use for routine reporting to funders. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife perspective, generating data that can be used for multiple purposes. And the key thing here, and this is what Paul was really inspired to make a point about, is that we're all pretty good at talking about activities and outputs of our work. And this is a classic challenge. It's more tricky to systematically capture the complex impacts of our work. And so this is the bar we're setting ourselves to reach this session. How do we communicate that kind of impact overall? I do want to say something about this action learning statement here, and we're going to talk about it at the end as well. We we are going to be talking about knowledge and frameworks and possible methods and indicators in this project. We're going to do a lot of it, and knowledge helps, but it needs to be practiced. And many of you are familiar with the distinction between, doing work like a recipe or doing work like an adaptive learner. Sometimes there's things that are so simple that if you follow the recipe, you'll get a pretty good outcome. You just have to follow the recipe, and the recipe has to be well laid out. Other things, the recipe itself doesn't help much. You can have guidelines and lay out a general approach to things, but how that happens has to be done on a case-by-case basis, and you only get good at it by learning by doing. So you might be able to get instructions around how to change the clock on a microwave, right? That's, someone lays that out. There's the knowledge. You can do it within 1 or 2 tries. Well, I can't actually. I still can't fix the clock on our microwave. And other things, you have a general idea of how it needs to be done, but you learn with your hands. You try things out, you get better at it, and you constantly refer to guidelines and recipes and methods. But the real story is you building the capacity and the confidence to do it in your own context. We're going to talk a bit more about how we're going to manage that, but that's the approach we're taking. We are going to be learning with our hands, even though we're guided and informed by the content in these webinars and post-follow-up coaching sessions. So that's the intent. We'll go to the next slide. The product is going to be, at the end of this series, we think you'll have enough knowledge or knowledge to produce the content to come up with an impact report that outlines who you are, your approach to reducing poverty, and your poverty reduction results so far. We're really going to emphasize that we'll be talking about things in a way that you can in a wholesale fashion, how generically one can produce these reports, and it's a fairly simple outline, knowing that everyone's going to have to customize the reports to their own context, but we really are going to focus on your ability to talk about the results side of things in a way that's coherent and compelling to people. We'll come back to this topic of supports shortly, but we want to confirm that this product that we hope to help you build, again, you're going to produce it, but we're going to try and provide some of the supports to make that happen, is going to be supported by 3 kinds of things. Number 1, we're going to have a series of 6 webinars, and we'll talk about the date of each of those and the topics of each shortly over the next half year plus. For each webinar, we'll have a follow-up workbook with a set of resources that you can draw upon to actually put some of the ideas of the webinar in practice. And that workbook will include basic questions about, have you thought about what are you doing about this, and hinting at things that you might have to pursue, knowing that your answers will vary like crazy because you're dealing with such different ways of approaching poverty. So you'll each come up with your own answers. But we will have resources in there that I'm going to call, Natasha and I chatted about the starting point resources, meaning here's what we think will be useful for you as you do this. But as the coaching itself unfolds, which we'll talk about shortly, we're more than willing to add to that resource list. So someone in Dufferin might have surfaced an issue that we say, hey, there's something that we hadn't thought of that, but there's a resource designed just for that. We're going to put it into the workbook or put it online for people. So that will be kind of a living workbook more than anything. And finally, we're going to, we have included here a process of coaching where you can, as you're unfolding this and iterating and trying to get it done, you might want to get some real-time support from your VC coaches, and I'll be working with the VC coaches to surface and address issues as they come up. We're going to have our own little tiny community of practice, but you will have that kind of real-time support with people who actually understand not only your work, but understand how it's unfolding in other cities. So we hope this triad of things is useful. It's not an overly new format. We've seen it work in lots of other instances, but it's one where we have a fairly good sense that it will help improve your capacity over time. And each of these is sort of a mutually reinforcing piece of work. So all 3 of them together, we think will make a difference. So those are the supports, and we can talk a bit about them in the Q&A. Why don't we go to the, I think I have the capability to go to the next slide. Let me just see here. There we go. I'm going to go back one. So let me share just sort of give you a vision of the kinds of content we're going to share with you. And as I share this, I want to let you know that when Paul first asked me to do this, I kind of said, aye, aye, Captain, knowing it was going to be a lot of work, because the challenge of helping people evaluate as something as complex as poverty reduction in so many very different contexts, very different strategies, with people with varying different levels of capacity, all the way from groups with one staff person to groups with 5 or 6 or even 7, and some of whom have a full-time evaluator on staff or a contract with the university. That's a real daunting task. So what the metaphor I have in my mind is, we are going to wholesale a framework and some indicators and methods for you that you have to bear the responsibility of retailing and customizing to your own context. And so we really are not saying this is a cookie cutter approach. We're going to provide some practices and some frameworks that are quite universal to inform and guide your thinking, but you will have to adapt them to your context. And the framework that we want to use is something that has been adapted actually from the field of environmental sustainability. And some of you have seen this and some of you haven't. And I want to confirm this is an adaptation, because I've talked actually yesterday with an expert on this framework, and they scolded me a bit for how we were adapting it in a way that wasn't true to its original intent. But I argued, and I still believe, that it's pretty roughly right, and reveals something about the overall nature of tackling a complex issue over time that other frameworks don't. And so let me walk through it here. Number one, the thing is based on 3 scales of change that are required in order to, and change in results in order to generate moving the needle kind of results that we want on poverty reduction. Now, we're talking about poverty reduction, but we've seen this used in environmental transition, access to justice, high school graduation rates, etc. So let me go through those elements. The first one is nudging or shifting community awareness and buy-in and ownership around a poverty reduction agenda, whether that be the overall public, key leaders, or cornerstone institutions. All of you know that if there is no will, never mind awareness, in a community around poverty reduction, the system itself remains stuck. There's almost inertia. You really don't have a lot of opportunities to mobilize a wide effort. And so to simply try to get people aware of it, understand the nature of poverty, get some insight and empathy into that so they're more predisposed to acting, that actually is an intermediate outcome that we should not only spend a lot of time on trying to achieve, but it's critical and foundational to the rest of the work. So understanding how well we do that is an outcome. Having people who previously were not interested in this saying, I'm going to work on poverty reduction now, or here's what we're doing, that is an outcome. So that's stream number 1, and we'll give you some examples of that right away. Now, stream number 2, and by the way, these things are interrelated, and we'll talk about how they are. There's a great phrase that many of you have already heard because we've used it so many times at Tamarack. Programmatic interventions help change the odds. Programmatic interventions help people beat the odds. Systems interventions change the odds for people. If we're in the business of moving population level outcomes around poverty, income rates, employment rates, etc., we are by definition in the game of systems change. So how do we nudge systems and policy change in a way that they don't just no longer hold people in poverty in place, because lots of poverty is because of systemic reasons? How do we create systems that really increase well-being and expand opportunity for people? So whether that's something as simple as, well, it's not simple actually, but as obvious as dealing with welfare regulations that do asset stripping for people receiving social assistance, which only allows them to accumulate some kind of assets before it's drawn back on their meager income supports. That's a policy change. Imagine how many people could benefit from that. Changing policy at the federal level, at the provincial level, the local level, shifting the way foundations invest in innovative projects. That's a policy level change. There's a lot of systems and policy that could evolve, and if they did, they would have a disproportionate impact on the lives of families that desperately need change. So that's level number 2. Level number 3 are niche innovations, or niche initiatives, or programmatic initiatives, and these are the things that actually most people are drawn to because they're concrete, they're tangible, and they're immediate. These are X number of people participated in a financial literacy program and have applied those skills to create, new savings programs with a locally participating credit union. These are, oh, we're starting up an affordable housing project in a part of town that used to be quite driven by NIMBY. We've got a new service collaboration that improves access to families who before weren't able to get in because of eligibility requirements. You people are in the field, you know how endless the variety of these things are, but these things are important, and they're not only do they generate immediate benefits for people, but some of them over time can actually lead to systems change because we could scale them up, scale them out, and scale them deep. And we won't talk about that just yet, but scaling out means growing the size of these niche innovations so more people are affected. Either because they're replicated across different organizations or the original invention is much bigger. Sometimes we need to scale them up. We need to change the policies and systems and resource flows that allow these things to get bigger. Something can't scale without a regulation or policy change. We might even have to scale them deep, which means how do you get the ideas behind great new innovations, financial literacy programs for people? How do you get those very ideas into the water supply? The cultural DNA of an organization. So lots of people are viscerally committed to sustaining these innovations, never mind scaling them. You will see, of course, and I'm going to give you an example right away, that we could report to the community, hey, here's all the things we are doing and the difference we're making at the scale of community awareness and buy-in. Here's all the things that we have done and contributed to around systems and policy change, and here's our whole portfolio of niche initiatives. But the more you think about it, any one initiative any one thematic area in your plan, be it improving access to early childhood development, increasing living wages, creating living wage strategies, dealing with housing, you almost always have to work across these scales. You need to budge the community, awareness and buy-in. You're going to be involved in some kind of systems and policy change, and it's hard to imagine that you can't somehow roll up your sleeves and get involved in programmatic or niche initiatives to make things happen. So we want to sensitize and normalize the idea that we're going to work across scales. We want to see results across scales, and we want to communicate across scales. Those kinds of results, let's call them intermediate results. These are the foundational things that have to happen so that over time, and you'll see in the matrix on the bottom here, the cumulative effect of all of these things will help contribute to shifts in population level changes. And by that, we mean, citywide levels of poverty in general, or in some cases, we may not be able to see effects on citywide levels. And I'm going to argue we won't see them for quite some time, even though we should continue to monitor that kind of data. But sometimes we might start seeing pockets of impact in certain neighborhoods or in certain schools where we're concentrating efforts, or for certain demographic groups that warrant or deserve higher priority in our strategic plans. So we might see this targeted or localized impact. So that's the framework. And what I'm going to do now is quickly just give you an example of how it lays out in a real concrete case study. And some of you have seen this case study in the presentations I made in Peel and Vancouver in the autumn of last year. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. This is a case study from your peers in Calgary, from Vibrant Communities Calgary, where they took on an issue of payday lending reform. And they actually didn't use this framework explicitly, but when you look at all the work they did, implicitly they were deliberately working across scales, and they had a population level impact in mind. So all of you are familiar with the idea of payday lending, that there's lending institutions out there that provide payday loans at predatory levels of pricing. I forgot my details on that, but it actually is annualized at 100 or more % a year. I think one was even 300% interest a year when you annualize the payday rate. So they wanted to get back at this because it has a disproportionate impact on low-income families who are not only predisposed to using these services more than others, partly because of the inadequacies of mainstream financial institutions' services, but also they are less willing to take the financial penalty of working with these organizations. So it's an obvious priority for many poverty reduction plans. This next slide is, I'm going to go through it. We were wondering how awkward this was going to be. We thought, oh, that's okay. Let's embrace the awkwardness. I want to just quickly walk through how long it actually takes to make an impact on something, and why we have to get good at telling little stories in order to tell a big story. And I'm going to walk through something that I put together in about an hour and a half of talking with them based on their documents in Calgary. And I'm going to argue that every organization on this call in doing poverty reduction, at a minimum, we're going to have to be able to build a basic ability to kind of, using a diary or something, to keep up with these milestones that initiatives that unfold organically over time to solve complex issues like this. So here's how it started. Momentum publishes a financial literacy curriculum in 2006 and supports thousands of people using it. Number two, they actually at one point they say, you know what, programmatic initiatives aren't strong enough by themselves. We actually want to get into policy and systems change. I'm going to do a quick check-in, Natasha or Allison or Al. It says that I have a weak connection here. Can you hear me?
It is a little bit choppy, Mark. We can hear you, but every now and then it gets a little bit difficult. Are there any programs in the background that you're able to close?
There are none, so I'm just going to have to persevere with this. Let me persevere. Sorry, folks, it's just a matter of the web access. I'm actually going to quickly go through this and not give you a blow-by-blow account of how this thing unfolded, but you will see as it's coming up that this process that they used in this project was committed to getting population level outcomes, but they had lots of little milestones over time, including a heck of a lot of work trying to build public awareness, engaging with public institutions at the municipal and the federal level. In the purple, you'll see here, doing programmatic pilot projects, including cash crunch loans with financial institutions to provide alternatives to payday lenders, continuing to write reports, to network with organizations. And then we're beginning to see here little hits. City Council passes a land use bylaw amendment by 13-to-1 vote, which actually places restrictions on how many payday lending organizations can be in a block. It's a small victory, but it's a long-term game that they're playing to reduce the concentration of these. They have policy hits. The City of Calgary's task force presents a standing policy committee recommendation to again amend bylaws. So they're beginning to accumulate ever so small bylaw nudges that make it more difficult for payday lenders to operate. We have the province beginning to adjust payday lenders, and the province acknowledges that the work in Calgary is a huge influence on the pacing and the content of their payday lending reforms. The purple ones continue to show how financial institutions are working on pilot projects, alternative financial services. We see here we get victories around better bills being developed, particularly the Government of Alberta Bill 31, a better deal for consumers. It's not moving for me here, yeah. And we are beginning to see some population level impacts. Now, this, again, I put this together in about an hour and a half that tracks the unfolding of initiative from 2006 to 13, which was easy, and then the relatively rapid accumulation of key milestones and outcomes in the last 5 years. Now, let me give you a slightly different angle on how this looks when we use that multi-level framework on poverty reduction. So just a quick check-in, is the voice better, Natasha?
It's better now, yeah.
Okay, I'm not distinguishing a ton here between activities and outcomes for a moment. I'm just categorizing them in a clumsy way. But here's what happened. This group did an excellent job of shifting public awareness and will on this issue. They completed first-rate research on the topic of payday lending. They did a lot of narrative work in Calgary, where they changed the narrative about what payday lending was, and they reframed it as payday loans to predatory lending, and really promoted the alternative of a financial empowerment for everyone in the city. They supported exemplar organizing on International Avenue, which had a concentrated effort of this, and they did it deliberately to mobilize people and to create public awareness of it. They did an excellent job of working with the print media, including the Calgary Herald, to get this into editorials. They inserted this as a priority into the community's Enough for All poverty reduction strategy, and they were relentless in engaging who we will call bellwether leaders, people who have disproportionate influence in the city, philanthropists and cornerstone institutions such as banks and the city to champion in the issue. So they did good awareness work, which again is a precondition to making all the other things happen. That work was mixed up and interwoven. Sorry, I'm having a hard time moving this slide here. Oh. With result number 2, niche innovations. Now, some of you use or don't use this framing of outcomes for programmatic initiatives, for poverty reduction initiatives. This is the Sustainable Livelihoods framework, and it's used by Momentum, which is the group that was really running this process, to talk about different kinds of poverty reduction outcomes. And actually, this is sort of instructive because you're all going to have a different way of defining poverty. They say poverty reduction is the accumulation of 5 different kinds of assets: financial assets, skills and knowledge, basic needs and services, a sense of self, and social connections and relationships with people. And they got their own way of tracking this. So they said, let's really track the outcomes, particularly on the financial asset side. And they were able to do that. They tracked the number of people, the number of people participating in programs and developing new skills, the number of people building new financial savings programs, including signing up to RDSPs and match saving programs, etc. So they tracked about 5 or 6 niche innovations here, including the number of program participants who went through all those pilot projects and cash crunch loans. So 5 or 6 initiatives, all tracked using this framework. Boom, they got some niche innovation outcomes. Result number 3 is they also tracked and tried to understand their contribution to all of these outcomes that nudge systems, including having the establishment of Enough for All poverty reduction strategy, include payday lending, 2 changes to city bylaws, including their business license bylaw and their land use bylaw, that made it more difficult to set up payday lenders. They helped and had a huge influence on the provincial government's Alberta's Act to End Predatory Lending. They got 4 leading lending alternatives by local credit unions, and they're now working on proposing changes to federal bill S-237, which is about consumer protection. I'm going to get to some people outcomes here shortly. Here's the cumulative effect of a lot of these things on payday lending in Calgary, and we can debate some of these indicators and go deeper on some of them, but this is actually, these indicators are drawn from multiple sources of data. The biggest impact has come from the payday lending changes at the provincial level, which again, the province will acknowledge Momentum and this coalition in Calgary had a strong influence on shaping. Within 2 years, the number of payday lending stores in the entire province has dropped from 103 to 165. In terms of localized impact on Calgary's International Ave, they started with 11 payday lenders and 18 cash store, but 11 of them doing payday lending. 3 of the locations have now closed, and the remaining 8, most if not all, have stopped payday lending because there's really no margins left in them. They've now moved into lines of credit and installment loans. In an assessment by a bunch of philanthropists who got together who estimated the impact of this, they estimated that in the province alone during the Christmas season, right after the loans were produced, that there was $33 million extra in non-predatory lending costs saved in the pockets of people in the province because they weren't paying those predatory numbers. And the Alberta government has their own number, and I haven't put it on here, but now can confirm that in terms of the cost of payday loans, Alberta now has the lowest rate in all of Canada. Now, these are all examples or signals about the scope and scale of population level change because of those impacts. But the game is not over. the group is now going deeper on understanding what's the real impact of these loans, things that don't show up easily on government statistics. And they're doing a case study with the Mount Royal University, who's following up with payday lenders, and the results are actually already out. But here are the questions they were asking. How are people borrowing now? What type of high cost debt are people obtaining now? Are they looking for replacements? Has the volume of debt they experience changed at all? Has their overall financial well-being changed? Are they borrowing online from other sources? And we're getting signals that they might be, and this is a big unanticipated outcome. We have a rough sense that the province's crackdown on the payday lending has decreased the number of vendors, and it's not because of other facts, costs, I should say, but we are now, let me go one more. Shelley Vandenberg, who's the head of First Calgary Financial, says, we think that we may have this unanticipated outcome of people who are going to payday lenders who are now online. And so we have to track that. And for any of you involved in a complex issue, you know that once you intervene into a complex issue, it intervenes back at you. It creates a set of ripple effects that you have to track. Now, that was a real quick run at this, and what we did here is we have an example of looking at a specific thematic area or a priority in a poverty reduction plan. In this case, payday lending. We're arguing that if you look at any of your thematic areas, housing, early learning and care, employment, etc., we are all going to not only have to track what has unfolded over time in our strategy to make that happen, like that crazy diagram I showed you about 10 diagrams that go with all the boxes. We don't have to do it that way, but we got to make sure we track the unfolding of it. And then we have to measure and make sense of it in a cross-scale manner so we get a complete picture of how we're laying the conditions for population level change. And then there's moments in time we've actually done enough and we've lucked out enough that we might actually see population level change or reduction in poverty for specific groups in specific areas. I'm going to stop because that's how we're going to organize the series, as you'll see right away. We're going to go through each level of change at a time and talk about what are the major questions you would ask here, what are the indicators you would use to do that, and what kind of methods might we use to get a sense of if we're making change or not. And when it comes to reporting time, you'll see that you'll have the option of either saying, let me tell you about all our outcomes in each of these different levels or chunks, or let me tell you a story about how we're moving on each level of our strategy, again, employment, childcare, etc., telling you about how we're making change at these multiple scales. The thing that we want to confirm, and some of you might be getting nervous as we walk through this example, is that we also acknowledge that you all have different levels of capacity. So the thing that we're going to try and do, we are doing, is we're going to talk about how you can answer questions about impact and outcomes and measurements with 3 different levels of impact. And what we've simply called them level 1, 2, and 3. And so a level 1 organization actually has very few staff and almost no evaluation experience or time to devote to it. So what we're going to say is, if that's your situation, we're going to give you some, here's some basic monitoring tools for each level of impact that allows you to at least track and communicate what you are doing and the possibility of outcome in a coherent manner. And that should be easy to do, but it will only hint at the kind of impact you're having because you don't have enough time or expertise or money to actually go deeper on it. But we know some of you, that's where you're at, and we need to help you start. Level 2 organizations will go a little bit further. We will provide participatory methods that provide you a more of a 360-degree perspective on impact. You'll have a stronger base of evidence, and you'll also be able to engage more people who will understand what kind of impacts you're having. And level 3 groups will have even more indicators and methods that offer a deeper perspective on impact, and you'll have more robust data and analysis. So we acknowledge that not all of you are starting from the same place. I'll finish this by saying, when we do the webinars and we provide you with the follow-up workbooks with those 3 levels of capacity, you will work with your coaches in an action learning format where you'll say, hey, I get or don't get certain parts of this. Here's what I want to try and do. And you will have to apply that knowledge as best you can in your context, knowing that you are going to get real-time support, not only from the workbooks, but from your coaching staff who will be ready to respond to you quickly, and then come together as a community of practice, and I'll support them as well to troubleshoot some of your more vexing issues. But the only way we're going to do this is to learn with our hands. I'm going to stop there for a moment to let Natasha confirm how quickly and what we're going to do in these, unfold this and what we're going to do in different sets of workshops, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A. Over to you, Natasha.
Great, thanks, Mark. And most of you or all of you should have received the one-pager already that lays out all of the dates for the webinars, but just to confirm kind of what the flow of this project looks like. So this is the info session. Thank you for attending this. Please go back to your tables, talk with your partners, make sure that this is the right fit. This type of project is the right fit for you and your table. If you go back a couple of slides, I will send you the recording along with the PowerPoint presentations and a form to submit your registration for the series in a couple of days. And we would ask that you register for the series and commit to doing these 6 one-hour webinars and the Getting to Impact report by March 7th. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to your manager of cities, talk to me, talk to Allison, talk to Elle, ask us lots of questions. What does this mean for me and my community? We'd be happy to take all of your questions. We will start with the first module on March 21st. And from there, we're going one webinar per month. They're 1 hour each. We ask that each of you, that there be at least 2 people on each call. For each of these months. And then in between, at least once a month, you're checking in with your manager of cities, again, like Mark said, to check in with us on the practice, the theory, what does this mean in Dufferin County? What does it mean in Halifax? That kind of thing, so that we can help you get to that impact report by the end of the year. So this all wraps up August 28th, but we will continue, your managers of cities, we will continue to support you throughout the fall, because we know that a lot of you said you don't have impact to report right now, but we will be supporting you throughout the year so that you can go at your own pace and develop this impact report by the end of the year. So I think that brings us to the end, and we can open it up for questions now. Elle, if you go to the next slide. You're sitting there, we've just presented a lot of information to you. What are your questions, comments, thoughts? You can type them into the chat box at the bottom. You can raise your hand if it's easier, and I can come and unmute you. See, Erica has asked, is there a cost to registering? No, it is completely free. You are all CRP members, and this is part of your membership. This is complimentary. Gary has asked, should each person register, or is a group registration okay? We are going to build a form where only one person needs to register, but if you can tell us the name of everybody who will be participating and their email, that will help us keep everybody informed when we send out those workbooks and the dial-in details and that kind of thing.
Maybe just another comment that we've been working on this measuring, or at least capturing and communicating poverty reduction outcomes for quite some time. And I want to confirm there's just no other way of getting good at it, and without just starting to build capacity for it. It's just relentless iteration to build the muscle and the muscle memory to start thinking like this and reporting out on it. And evaluation is intimidating for some, but and people actually have a bad reaction to it. And Paul actually asked us not to use the word evaluation. The issue is, can we at least understand our impact so we can communicate it and maybe learn from it? And I think that's a useful way of thinking about it, but we have to build this muscle. The why is obvious. For me, getting feedback and making sense of it is like reality testing. We all want to move the needle on poverty. We need to find ways of getting coherent feedback that makes sense to us. This is the latest iteration of how we think we can do it. It's not the best one necessarily. I think the best one continues to emerge, but it is one of the more meaningful ways of doing it. So I really don't think there's another alternative for people right now who want to get good at this, except participate in this kind of seminar. There's not enough people working on this, and thankfully Tamarack is, and Vibrant Community is.
Absolutely. And I see Stephanie from Oxford has written in, if by November we don't anticipate having outcomes, but we can produce a report that simply states how we plan to achieve and the small steps that we have taken to date. I'm wondering, Stephanie, there were some things that Mark had talked about, even in terms of just starting with shifting awareness and buy-in. Those might be some of the things that you're starting with. Even by the end of the year, do you think that you would have something to report on in that section, and then maybe a plan for each of the other sections? Stephanie, why don't I unmute you to be able to speak to this? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I was just wondering, in our scenario, I think we might have some pieces that we can report on, some smaller pieces, but it wouldn't be a full, it's what you were saying, Mark, about telling the little stories. I don't think we're going to be at the bigger picture pieces, and I'm really seeing the webinars and the tools you're talking about helping us get to figure out what our action plan, how we should be implementing. So that's why I don't know that we're going to have a fulsome report by end of November. And I guess just trying to understand the expectations of that report, because I could see this wholesale or framework or whatever helping us more to get there. And then once we're there and starting implementing, then we could use the report framework to like next year or the year after that kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. And Natasha, I'm going to ask you to weigh in about Tamarack's expectation of a report. I don't think Tamarack's thinking of it as a deliverable to them. I think it's saying that's our hope that you can produce a report if you have those conditions to produce it. But I will say, in your instance, here's two things that are going to come up on the first Foundations for Measurement call. People often flail about blindly for some kind of measurement as a proxy for understanding something. Measurement is such a loaded word where people go, what did we make progress? How do you measure it? How do you know? So it's like a default, a cultural default. Did we make change? Talk to me about measures. The big thing on tackling complex issues, including poverty, is we have to frame what an outcome looks like. It's as much a framing exercise and a discipline as it is a measurement discipline. So simply the work of building a narrative and an understanding of what an outcome looks like and what the work is trying to do, using a framework like this or whatever you're using, that you almost have to do that even before you start capturing outcomes, because we need to offer people the interpretive lens within which to make sense of what is going on. If we don't, it looks chaotic and people, again, flail blindly about for some kind of measurement. So Stephanie, in your case, I'm just wondering if that's exactly what you're doing. You're setting the conditions for framing outcomes, and why these activity areas are important. And we can't say we move the needle on any of these areas, but we're giving you exemplars of the kinds of things we're trying to do, why they're significant, and giving you examples of micro outcomes, right? That we're heading in the right direction. I just want to stop in and check, see if that resonates with you.
I think it does. I don't want to speak for my other member from We Have a Measurement and Monitoring Subcommittee, so Rob's on that as well. And I think that's how you said it is actually exactly how we've been feeling. We're trying to figure out that framework, and I think this would really help us. So yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just add on one thing, and it's a bit of a thing coming up in the measurement stuff. One of the principles that I'm taking from some of the work we're doing on transformative evaluation is no narratives without numbers and no numbers without narrative. A number without a narrative, you can take this to the bank, means nothing. People don't understand it. It might take their anxiety down because they see a number. We don't know why it's significant, what it means. In poverty reduction, we need to provide a narrative. What is the context for this? Why is this important? Why is it significant? What does it mean? On the other hand, if we just have narrative without some kind of measurement, we miss part of the story. We don't get depth. We don't get trends. We don't get scale. So whenever we're capturing outcome to communicate, learn, and to inform strategy, the data we get back has to be almost like a yin and the yang, one part narrative, one part number. So we'll play with that a lot more. In fact, you'll have seen some of it in micro in this Calgary Payday Lending example. looking forward to that first session.
And Stephanie, in terms of participation from Tamarack, it's not expected 100% that by the end of the year you have an impact report. With the action learning approach, we figure that being able to do this as you go helps to put that theory into practice right away. But if you're not at the place yet that you have outcomes to be able to track, it just wouldn't be possible for you. So I think, going through with what you're able to might be helpful for the next year, and then coming up with a plan by the end of the year, again, can help frame the work for you for years to come. Okay, we're a couple of minutes to the end. We have a couple of more questions in the chat box. I can answer Gary's right away. Yes, the webinars will be available after they have been run. We ask that you do attend so that you're able to ask questions as they come up. However, the webinars will be available. You can take them back to your group, use them for reference. Absolutely, they're at your disposal. And then, Mark, finally, this one is from Erica for you. She is wondering if the FSG 6 conditions for systems change was referenced in developing the framework at all. She says there are similarities. The FSG one just includes a few more elements.
Yeah, there is. This frustrates some people, Erica. I hope it doesn't frustrate you, but most of the work on systems change, there's lots of crossover around it. So I think this multi-level perspective is broader than the FSG one. And the FSG one is actually a simplification of some of the stuff done by Donna Meadows, who is sort of the systems change pioneer in the world. But there will be, there's a familial similarity between the FSG one and this one. And I think, in fact, that workshop on nudging systems will even refer to that as a lens. By the way, when it comes to, I'm glad you raised that. I want to confirm something about frameworks and the way we understand them in models. We're using this framework, this multi-level perspective framework. Here's the challenge with them. All frameworks are inaccurate because they can capture the complexity of what you're doing. So this framework, but they reveal some things. So this framework reveals multi-scale nature of the work and its relation to population level outcomes in a way that seems kind of visually obvious, maybe not counterintuitive, but maybe countercultural and obvious. So that's helpful, but all frameworks at the same time can capture the complexity of things. And this is why people always end up using multiple frameworks. This one will reveal things. The FSG thing will reveal things, and it's hard to find a perfect framework. It's just useful to find a framework and then to say, feel free to use other frameworks if this one doesn't reveal certain things to you. So we're betting the farm on this framework. The series is organized around it, but we certainly encourage you to say, yeah, I like that session on systems change, but I actually like the FSG framework a little bit more. That would be good too. And you'll see in the toolkit that we'll offer other ways of thinking about and measuring systems change above and beyond the one that we present in the webinar. Erica, we're rabid pluralists.
All right, so looking at the time, we're now just past the hour. I want to say thank you for Mark for doing this intro session and for everybody for participating and asking lots of great questions. Now that you have more information on the Getting to Impact coaching program, please take some time to review the information with your team and decide whether it's a good fit for your initiative to participate in to help you achieve your goals. In the follow-up email that I send you in a few days, I'll include the link to the recording and the registration form. Please submit the form when you are ready to commit to the coaching program. The deadline to register, as I said, is March 7th, and we will send the materials for the first call on March 7th. Then the first session will be held on March 21st. As always, we have many exciting upcoming online and in-person events with Tamarack. You can find a full list of learning opportunities on the Tamarack website at www.tamarackcommunity.ca/event listing. And finally, to Mark and to everyone who participated on today's call, if you have any, thank you. And if you have any questions about the program or if you have feedback, please reach out to one of your managers of cities, either Elle, myself, or Allison. We really look forward to hearing from you. So once again, thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.